Hi, everybody. My name is Pam Katrakis, and I'd like to welcome you to our session today, The Power Within One Text to Reimagining Integrated Literacy Experiences that Bring Efficiency and Joy to Teaching and Learning. I'd like to thank the EdCollab team for having me today and including me in this experience. And I'd also like to express some gratitude for each of you for taking the time to come and attend this session and learn together. Throughout today's session, there's going to be many opportunities to pause the video and take some time to ponder some ideas, think through how you can make this work or something similar work in your learning space, and or jot down some notes. So if you would like, feel free to go grab yourself a piece of paper and something to write with now, or have whatever you need handy. And let's go ahead and get started. Feel free to unpause the video whenever you're ready to begin. I really hope that our session today feels like a guided exploration of some of these wonders. What does it mean to integrate literacy experiences, and why would we do this? How might I find all the possibilities that exist within one power-packed mentor text? And could a small stack of mentor texts really prepare us for abundant teaching and learning situations and scenarios? So throughout today's short session, I really hope to be able to touch on some of these ideas and make sure there's something that you could take away that feels appropriate and exciting for you. So let's go ahead and get started. And I thought that we could start today with a little game. This is probably one of the last times I'll read off a slide, but I thought we would play a teacher appropriate version of Never Have I Ever. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to read these out, and I encourage you to reflect and see if you have ever felt any of these experiences or you could relate to any of these scenarios. Never have I ever asked a colleague, what mentor text do you use for that lesson? Never have I ever looked up the best mentor text for a particular skill, unit, or genre. Never have I ever felt like district resources were not enough. Never have I ever been frustrated because the district adopted a new initiative, but not all the stuff to support implementation of said initiative. Never have I ever felt exhausted by lesson planning. And never have I ever noticed that students are not transferring what they know from one part of the day to another. And quite honestly, these were really easy scenarios for me to come up with because I have, in the 20-something years that I've been teaching, felt every single one of these scenarios on many occasions. For years, I thought it was just me, and I thought perhaps I was doing something wrong. Then when I started talking with colleagues within my building, I thought maybe it's just us, because I realized that there was some comfort in knowing that others felt this way, but also discomfort with the idea that we shouldn't have to feel this way, and maybe there were some other options. So I began to explore and play around with some different ideas. And today I want to share with you some of what I found helpful for rectifying a whole lot of these situations. We know that the ever-evolving nature of education and often insufficient funding frequently has us teachers do the imaginable with whatever we have on hand. And despite our knowledge, our skill, our creativity, and our dedication, this work can feel and be incredibly overwhelming. So I'm hoping that when we think about really looking at and using one power-packed tool or a short stack of these power-packed tools in really intentional and strategic and flexible ways, we're going to have a lot of benefits for us as educators. But not only that, let's also consider the flip side. I also consider the perspective of students. And if every single day we're using a different mentor text to teach a different strategy or model a different lesson, or every single time the bell rings or the students go to a new classroom or we start working in a new subject, there's a whole new set of resources that go with it, we can begin to understand why perhaps students might not even consider the idea that they can use what they've learned in one part of the day in another part of the day. Very often we think about how can we support that more consistent application, when really sometimes it's just helping kids to make the connection and helping them to realize that what we do here can also help us there, and there as well. And sometimes when we revisit a power-packed tool in really strategic ways, not only in different parts of the literacy block, but sometimes in different parts of the day, we can help to create that authentic connection for students and help foster that understanding that they can use what they know, they can use their strengths that they have here to help them tackle some content in other areas and grapple with some of those new concepts as well. So today, I really hope that if you've ever felt any of the scenarios that are listed here, first of all, you're not alone. And secondly, we can really think about how we can use some power-packed tools to help us feel less of this as we go about our day. And a big part of this really comes down to the idea of an integrated literacy approach. And by this, I mean that we really need to effectively communicate and comprehend in all that we do. That's not specific to just one part of literacy or only literacy. So for me, integrated literacy really helps us as teachers use our minutes effectively and efficiently and helps students to really promote transfer in one part of the literacy block to the next, but also from one part of the day to the next as well. So what do I mean by this? The first thing I think about is when we teach in isolation, it often stays in isolation. The more connections we foster and create together as a learning community, the more likely we are to use what we know in really flexible and authentic ways when it's needed. So we really can't separate the work of readers and writers and conversationalists and word and language explorers. We achieve so much more very often when we take a more holistic view of literacy. The elements of literacy are not only complementary, but really they're inseparable. And secondary, not only are these elements that are listed on our screen so closely connected and really necessary to help support one another, we also think about integrated literacy as extending beyond our literacy block. Mathematicians, social scientists, historians, scientists, musicians, composers, health advocates, right? We are all speaking, listening, and reading and writing. And we really want to think about, as Zaretta would happen, would talk about building our intellective capacity and helping students learn how to learn and then use that in a whole bunch of different situations to help them become successful drivers of their own learning. So today, when we talk about using a power-packed tool, we're going to be using that power-packed tool to help us integrate literacy and foster these connections. And by doing so, we achieve more efficiency in our instruction and create greater connection in our teaching and the students' learning as well. When we're using an integrated approach to literacy, we can use any of the practices that we know and we love and that are backed in research, and really we're confident that we're going to go the distance. So maybe you're using some of your favorite methods like shared reading or interactive read aloud or small group instruction. We can use all of those things and we want to use those things, but we also want to think about how can we embed and integrate literacy into some of these integrated literacy experiences as well. For me, inherent in literacy is a sense of playfulness, joy, and a necessary sense of thrill and learning that we all need, and I think we're all craving. They're not only important parts of learning, but they're essential parts of learning as well. I often say that sense of playfulness and play is a human right. It's not an add-on. And inquiry tends to help us achieve a bit of that playfulness and joy and discovery and that tinkering feeling with so much of what's happening in the classroom. Inquiry is a natural way to pique student interest, garner engagement, and really inquiry can be fuel for critical thinking and deep learning that begins to help students connect those dots and transfer and apply what they know. And while some people might have the impression that inquiry is good for math or inquiry is good for science, but not for literacy, meaningful and worthwhile classroom inquiry across the day in all of our subjects and in all of our content, it's prepared and it's thoughtful. It does embed ongoing assessment and it is aligned with explicit teaching. So we never need to think about an either or situation. It's a how can we weave these together? So when we think about integrated literacy, it might not be only integrating reading, writing, word study, grammar, speaking, listening, but it also might mean integrating some of the teaching methods that we know, love, and already use with some more inquiry and discovery-based methods as well. And that's one more way that we can integrate content across the literacy block and across the day. Inquiry with a well-chosen, power-packed text can be part of a well-rounded approach to literacy instruction. These kinds of experiences are going to support collaboration, problem solving, persistence, flexibility, and plenty of real-world transfer. So today, when we have an opportunity to look at some sample lessons, you will see some of the traditional literacy methods that you're probably really familiar with using in your classroom. And you're also going to see how we can authentically embed some inquiry into these experiences and really use the texts to help us create active learning for the students in the classroom. So as we get going today, we want to remember that we can really use a text in so many different ways. We're absolutely going to center them in inquiry-based experiences. We could also use them in shared writing, shared reading, interactive writing, whole class lessons, small group lessons, perhaps when we're having one-on-one conversations or one-on-one coaching with students in our classroom. A power-packed tool is really going to go the distance. There's so much that can be explored, investigated, and discovered about words, language, ideas, and writing techniques in a really great power-packed text. So sometimes I think of these just as multitasking mentor texts. As teachers, we know that we're natural multitaskers, and we learn to do this almost instinctively, especially as we get more experience in a setting, in a grade, with a particular unit, etc. So I like to think of using these power-packed tools as multitasking mentor texts. For me, it's our Swiss Army knife of teaching. A multitasking mentor text is one text that can be used multiple times and for a variety of purposes, weaving together different aspects of literacy. And when we use these flexible tools that have so much value and so many different purposes, we're modeling authentic fostering authentic transfer, right? And how students can use what they know in one place to the next. It also helps us to see that it's not just a one-to-one correspondence between a strategy and a text. In each text, there's lots of different things that we can learn and do as readers, as writers, as word explorers, as language explorers, as human beings. So today, we're going to be delving into how we can use one text, but most ideally, a short stack of these really power-packed texts to help us integrate literacy. So how we can connect reading, writing, word study, grammar, and conversation, but also begin to make some other connections across our day as well. And by doing so, we have a little bit more a little bit more ease, and students will hopefully also experience more ease, and success as well. So when I'm getting ready to choose, like, what makes a power-packed text? How can I choose a text that's going to help me to go the distance and to be able to integrate literacy? I often think about three main domains: identity, community, and curriculum. And I actually consider them in this order. I consider identity first, community second, and curriculum third. A lot of people feel that this is backwards and that I should consider curriculum first. But quite honestly, when I start with students and work from there, I know that I'm being student-centered in whatever I'm doing in the classroom. It's more likely to be relevant and meaningful for the kids that are currently in the room. And then I could create those learning experiences from then there. And of course, they'll be aligned with what I have to do as a teacher too. So when I'm considering how I can choose a really great text that's going to help me to go the distance, when I'm trying to choose a text that I'm going to be able to use not only for writing, but also in reading and perhaps spelling or phonics or grammar, and maybe even in math or social studies or science and beyond, the very first thing I'm going to do is consider identity. When I'm selecting mentor texts, that means that I need to be really cognizant and make sure that cumulatively the texts that I've chosen and that we've chosen together as a class feature a variety of topics, perspectives, people, characters, settings, problems, and of course, we know that authenticity in the voices that we share in those texts is essential. So you can see here a couple of the questions that I'll often consider when I'm first looking at possible contenders to see whether or not they're going to be these power pack tools that I could use flexibly and intentionally all across the day. So first, I think about how this text matches up to the kids in the room and how this is going to expand our viewpoint as well. And that's the very first thing that I consider. The next thing I consider are very often the learning goals and the interests of the community of students that are currently in the room as well. So here's when I'm going to investigate any possible contenders and see which provide plentiful opportunities to support the learning goals of those currently in the room. And this often means that perhaps a text that I loved last year, I might not choose to use this year because the kids in the room have changed, their strengths have changed, their current next steps might also be a little bit different year to year. And if you teach in a secondary setting, we know the same can sometimes be true period to period, that it's very rare to have groups of kids who are ready for the exact same thing, the exact same way, the exact same time on the exact same day. So when we want to then begin to hone and really create these tight text sets, we want to also consider community. And these are a couple of the inquiries that I will ask myself as I'm looking at a text and I'm deciding if it really is a power-packed tool and will help me to go the distance with my teaching and be useful in not just one or two scenarios, but in abundant different teaching and learning scenarios. And third is when I now bring in things like standards or district curriculum or something like that. I know that there will be a connection there, but I want to start with students. So first, individual students and identity, then the current community of learners in the room, and last but not least, for sure, is when I'm bringing in that curriculum. So if I have a stack of texts, because I love books probably as much as you do, and I have tons of them, I then go through them and try to think about, okay, identity, and my text set narrows down, community, my text set narrows down a little bit more, curriculum, and that's my final funnel to help me really choose texts that are going to be super power packed and be that Swiss Army knife of teaching across the literacy block and hopefully beyond as well. So at this point, I cross-reference the texts that are still in the running, and I see what's happening in my curriculum that's coming up. So once the people in the room are considered, I further hone my text sets by melding student goals with curricular goals, and I bring those two worlds together. So when you're getting ready to decide what's going to be a power-packed text, one thing that you can do is use this process to help you select texts that are going to really be helpful and useful to you in more than one way and on more than one day. You might first consider identity, then community, and then the curriculum. And this is something that works for me, so feel free to give it a go and see if it also works for you as well. So what does this mean and how is this different from what you might have done in the past? Well, here are examples of really fabulous texts, and many of these texts I still would use and choose to use today, but here's what my text sets often looked like in previous years versus, I'll show you next, what my text sets often look like now. So a couple of things you might notice are that these are really great texts and that these text sets, we could almost recognize what writing unit they were designed to go with. So for instance, these texts over here are part of a text set that I often used when I was doing some sort of personal narrative writing unit, seed story unit, small moment story unit, whatever you like to call it. But when we're talking about these accounts of things that happen to us and were important to us, and we're zooming in and we're trying out some different storytelling strategies, these are very common, fabulous texts that I often found myself leaning on and using. And in the primary grades where our how-to writing, is often quite common. These were some of the how-to books that I would often pull out. And again, I would use different books, different days at different times to teach different strategies to the class. There's a couple things you might notice. Although these are great books, and again, I might choose to use them, and I'll always love picture books and include them. In each of these text sets, every single text is a picture book. And the other thing that you might notice in this before text set is that they were designed to support writing instruction. So in the past, a lot of times I used mentor text for writing. I didn't necessarily then think about how I could also use this text in reading, in word study, and in grammar, because we really want to make sure that we provide contextualized and authentic learning experiences. And a text can help us to make things more grounded in reality and less discrete. So now when I'm creating a text set, it's often a little bit different. Now when I'm creating a text set, you're going to notice some things like this. Like I still have picture books, but I'm also going to layer those picture books with some other types of text as well. These days, my text sets that I create are all created with texts that help nurture identity, community, and curriculum. And they're multimodal. I want to have ways to invite different learners into the world of the learning that's happening. I want there to be interest and excitement when we use different types of texts. And I want there to be, of course, we can use some oldie and goodie text, but I want there to be plenty of relevant, new, current titles. When we think of Rudine Sims Bishop, of course, we consider mirrors and windows and sliding glass doors. I want to make sure different interests and passions and topics that current students are interested in are represented in this text set. So one year I had a class that was obsessed with the Titanic. Those types of texts often appeared in my text sets a little bit more often because they were drawn to those texts. No matter what I was teaching, it just created a little bit more excitement for them, right? So something else you might notice here is that I almost always include a teacher or student written text as well. So it's not always a formally published text. It might be something that was written in the classroom. And again, this is a really important way to enhance our teaching texts. And finally, I almost always include some kind of poetry or lyrical text as well, which is going to be fabulous for so many different reasons. So here's an example of a multitasking mentor text set. Each one of these is a power-packed tool. Each one of these 5 texts can be used in reading, writing, word study, grammar, and beyond. Each one of these texts can help me integrate literacy, and each one of these texts can help me provide relevant and fun and joyful and meaningful learning experiences for the students that are currently in the room. So this is how I begin to verbify and really help a mentor text come alive across the entire literacy block. Here's another example of an after text set. So in this text set, we get reminded that reading and writing are not passive acts, and we really want to be thinking about action as well. So Omar Rising is a really fabulous middle grades novel that was recently released. I think that a lot of people will love this book. And on one side, we see a text set to help us bringing it down to perhaps students who are a little bit chronologically younger or in an earlier developmental phase of their learning experience, and how we can use this same text and stretch it up to students as well. So again, we might start with one power pack tool, and that could be our grounding text, and then think about how we can strategically layer other types of texts. And sometimes these are cross-genre and cross-format texts to help invite a wider range of students into the learning experience and really promote critical thinking of texts across modalities and across the literacy block too. So here's another example of an after text set where each one of these texts is a power-packed tool, and they complement each other and will build on each other in that instruction. Here's another example of a text set. I actually used this one in an interdisciplinary study of trees, forest ecology, and environmentalism. And we also studied the joy and the wonder of the outdoors. And again, we have a grounding text, one power pack tool that was our core text. And then from that core text, we might begin to choose others to layer on. So this might be one text on this set on this side. And again, so flexible. We can also use this text as the grounder of this text set as well. So I almost have two separate text sets for you here on this one slide to help you see how one text can go the distance across grades, across settings, across teaching and learning scenarios. And by doing so, we really feel prepared for a wide range of teaching. Here's one more example of an after text set too. Again, we see Out of Wonder, which is really fabulous, fabulous poetry anthology. And then on one side, how I can round out that text for perhaps a younger crowd and some of my earlier types of units developmentally that I might be teaching in school versus some older students that I might do in the upper elementary and middle grades on this side as well. So one text can really help us rethink and reimagine not only how we can connect the dots across the literacy block and beyond, but also in different grades and different settings. So when we consider identity, community, and curriculum, when we're choosing these text sets, we are prepared for abundant teaching opportunities. We don't have to keep searching far and wide for a new text for every single thing we teach. We have what we need right here in this core text set that's really going to help us be prepared for teaching and learning all across the day and very often in different settings. Mr. President. Amanda Goldman. So at this point, I'm just going to invite you to pause the video. And when you pause the video, I'm going to ask you to please ponder some of the questions on one side of your screen, thinking about what you're currently using in your classroom. And then I'm going to ask you to begin to imagine how you might build upon or enhance the strengths that are currently in place in your instruction and begin to think about where you might head next. And please take a minute to think, to even say it out loud if you're sitting by yourself, or jot down a few ideas. And when you're ready, unpause this video and we'll continue on where we see how we bring these worlds together. In our next section, we're going to be talking about how we can pull together these mentor texts and integrated literacy and what it looks like in action. Welcome back. So now that we've talked a whole lot about the basics, we've talked about what integrated literacy is. We've talked about why it's important to connect the dots across the literacy block, and also perhaps begin to consider how we can create some even wider experiences that extend beyond the literacy block. We've also talked about the power of one tool and then layering these power-packed tools to really help us feel prepared for a wide range of teaching and learning. So we're not searching for a brand new text every time we're teaching something new. To help us get a greater vision for what this looks like in action, let's take a look at some lesson sets that came from what we just talked about. So here we see the same text set. This is a text set that I might use in K-12 to help nurture some different K-12-ish. And of course, I can use this beyond as well. Goals that we might have in reading, writing, word study, grammar, conversation, and beyond. Again, a lean set of intentionally chosen multimodal, sometimes multi-genre, multi-format text helps us to go the distance. So this is a really fabulous book. If you liked Just Ask, you will also love the new follow-up book, Just Help. In the book, the main character, Sonia, which we see is a little bit of a self-account, wants to assist in making her community better and safer. Across the pages of this new picture book, the people in Sonia's neighborhood work together, and in many ways, they're working in service of their community. There's an author's letter in the book that explains why it's crucial to understand the world as one very large neighborhood. And I just love this idea, and it's part of what makes me really love this book. On the very first page, Mom asks the main character, "How will you help today?" And I keep thinking about that's such an important question that we can always ask ourselves and others in our learning community each and every day too. So of course, this book seems to easily make its way into a narrative reading unit and a narrative writing unit. In addition to that, we might also refer to this book in social studies when we're talking about community. and social studies when we're talking about civics. And I also think about how we can use this book to support personal and community wellness and think about what it means to contribute and give back and really be an active member of a community. So when I begin to think about how I can use this one power-packed text in a variety of learning scenarios, let's take a look. I might use the very first page of this book, which we see here. And on this very first page, we might start, after reading it aloud and enjoying the story as a community reader, we might start to use some inquiry. And even using this first page, I might just pose an inquiry to students like, how do writers get their readers interested? And maybe we take a few minutes to look and explore this first page and think about what the author and the illustrator did to help captivate our interest. And if you wanted to extend this, of course, you could also bring in first pages or first sections of the other texts that are in this text set too. But when I took just a few minutes to recently do this with students, some of the things that students noticed were that we can show the setting to help the movie start in the reader's mind, that we can have the characters say something, that we can include an action so that the reader gets to know the main character. And even on the first page, we can drop a hint about the big idea. And this is coming from primary students. So even with a 5-minute inquiry, students were able to come up with and discover so much just by revisiting the first page of this book and thinking about what the writer and the illustrator did to help get us interested as a reader. And here's an example again, how we could bring inquiry into our literacy block with a little bit of a reading angle and a little bit of a writing angle as well. When we're first reading this book, if we were doing an interactive read aloud, we might even read this with a few different lenses. So during that interactive read aloud, while we're enjoying this story, we might think about how readers pause and ponder the reactions they're having while reading. And every so often, we might stop and model some of the reactions we're having as the teachers, and we might invite students to give that a go as well with a partner in the classroom as we're reading aloud. When we think about moving just beyond the reading lens, we can also support conversational skills in this community setting of read aloud as well. So we might think about how conversationalists really need to listen before they respond. And we might, again, model that and scaffold that for students during this learning experience that we're having together. And because we always want to have that human element and SEL-esque, I sometimes say personal and community wellness, does not need to be separate or an add-on, and often works so much better when it's embedded in the same read aloud at the same time. We might even end it up with a little bit of a discussion about how it feels to ask for help and accept help. And we might think about or talk about times that we had to do one of those things. And we might also think about when else and where else we can pitch in as a classroom community right here, right now, today. Right? So this one text and this one read aloud experience, we can move beyond only reading strategies and also bring in some speaking and listening supported work and also some personal and community wellness work as well, thereby integrating literacy with what we're already doing. So the inquiry experience had a little bit of a writing lens. Now this interactive reading experience has a reading lens, a conversational, speaking and listening lens, and also that personal and community wellness lens as well. We might come back in perhaps a whole class or a small group lesson where we think again about that first page and don't just notice what the writer did, but get inspiration for trying that in our own writing as well. So we might teach a lesson on how being a copycat can be a really good thing, and how writers get inspired to try new moves by studying a part of a mentor text and then trying something similar in their writing. And here we see that after studying this page, a first grader that I was recently working with was able to try out a really similar strategy in their writing. They thought about setting it up with the beginning of a sentence and then adding some talking right away. So you can see the structure is quite similar, even though the story topics are really different. So again, we're creating this one text, and what you could see here, every single one of these lessons came from that one text, and some of them were even from the same part of that one text too, to really help us integrate reading, writing, speaking, listening, social and emotional wellness, personal and community wellness as well. So I'm going to ask you to pause this video. Here's one more page of this power-packed text. I'm going to ask you to think about what learning opportunities do you see here on this page when you pause it? What might you teach or model that readers do? How can we use this in writing? What might we think of with word or language explorers? For instance, for phonemic awareness, we can choose any word and we could segment it, we could blend it, we can consider rhyming words, right? We might notice the high frequency words on this page. We might think about CVC word families, blends, digraphs, vowel patterns. There's so much that we might discover. Go ahead and pause the video right now. And I encourage you to think about, say, or jot down a bunch of different learning opportunities that you see even on this one page of this one fabulous power-packed text. And when you're ready, unpause and we'll continue on. So this was in our forest ecology text set. This is our next text that I wanted to look at together. And The Wisdom of Trees is a really great, fabulous new text that came out. Lita Judge is both the author and the illustrator. And it is a deep dive into the hidden community of trees. It provides a very accessible gateway to research and information through gorgeous illustrations, poetry, and expository information. It really is the complete package. The watercolor and pencil illustrations are breathtaking and like really beg us to linger on the pages, noticing more, thinking more, reacting more about what we're reading. On each page, there's a poem personified as if the trees were talking and putting into action in a poem some of the scientific information that's also included. And that scientific expository information that's included really provides the perfect balance of needed and wow. And moreover, in this amazing text, the author and illustrator shares with readers that forest ecologists have discovered a secret tree language that helps trees work together in their communities. She also shares that trees live longer when they help defend one another and they support one another. I mean, come on, this is exactly what we were just talking about with just help. And now we're seeing that this is part of what trees do in nature too. It's amazing. So this text, I could use it in a reading or a writing poetry themed unit. I could use it in a reading or a writing informational reading or writing unit. I could use it in a research unit. There's so many different places in my literacy block that this could go. When I consider the language standards, grammar, vocabulary, words that I might do, we can use this book to really explore figurative language, word choice, content, vocabulary, and virtually every single phonemic awareness, phonics, spelling option out there. Every grammar concept out there that you could probably teach is in this text. And if we think beyond our literacy block, of course, we could use this text in science when we might be studying nature, trees, forests, ecosystems, forest ecology, or environmentalism. In art, we might study and explore the watercolor painting. And again, when we think about that personal and community wellness lens, we think about being a contributive member of a community. And we also think about finding joy, solace, and wonder in nature. This can also be used to help us with some kind of environmental activism too. Again, making sure our teaching isn't limited to the classroom, but extending beyond the walls of our classroom as well. This one power-packed text can help us in reading, writing, every corner of your literacy block and so far beyond your literacy block as well. So here you see an example. This is a student learning artifact from bringing some inquiry into the use of this text. So here, this was a third grade class that I was working with, and we essentially previewed the text headings and the illustrations throughout the book. We then collaboratively created questions that felt personally relevant and interesting, and we posted these questions on a class wonder wall. That day, we investigated one of these questions. We chose one that we wanted to delve into, and we did a little bit of research that day together to explore that one wonder. Over the next few weeks, the class then explored other wonders that we came up with, making the most of the little moments. So sometimes this was done at the beginning or the end of our literacy block or of our science block, in morning meeting, times like that. And then lo and behold, this really amazing thing kind of started to happen. Kids started doing their own research on their own time and started bringing in their research artifacts to share with the rest of the class. So for me, this is what happens when the learning grows from students. When we create text sets with students in mind, and when we co-create text sets with students, and we have that multimodal, multi-genre, multi-format, there's something for everybody. They're brought into the learning. And when we bring inquiry into literacy and don't only use our beloved gradual release methods, kids get really excited. We far supersede state standards or what might be in the district curriculum, and student motivation and engagement is at an all-time high. So here's an example of one inquiry experience. And now I want to share with you how we use that same text in a more scaffolded community-based experience as well. So here you can see where we used the text as inspiration and as grounding for interactive writing. So let me just tell you a little bit more about this. In interactive writing, one of my favorite teaching methods or teaching structures that we can use, students participate orally by sharing all the ideas. As the teacher, I write down and I compose a lot of what they say, but I share the marker, the pen, or the keyboard with students at strategic times to help them think about how they can transfer what they know from word study or grammar to writing. So it's a really great component to help us bring together those different aspects of literacy. So here, you can see a tree outside our classroom window. Happened to be a day that it was snowing, and early in the winter as well. So this was a great opportunity to take advantage of the excitement that was being felt with the snow that was falling outside our windows. And we leaned on our mentor text to help us compose this poem together as a class. So this was in the style of the personified poems that Lita Judge includes in our text. And it actually came from two different sections. One of the sections was called Trees Prepare to Sleep, and another one was called Winter Dormancy. And in just the few minutes that it took us to create this, creativity and imaginations were sparked. Student ideas were centered, class community was nourished, and nature and the outside world were appreciated, all in this community experience that we were having as a class. You can see that all students were invited in, and we encouraged translanguaging in our class poetry writing, and we celebrated the full linguistic repertoires of everybody in the room. You can also see the parts where students dipped in were because we were studying inflected endings, and we could also think about grammar with past tense verbs as well. So what happens when sometimes we just add a D, sometimes the word change, sometimes they realize we have to double the P before we go on, right? Sometimes we can just add the ED. So we see some different examples, but again, kids are transferring what they know from word study to writing. And we're doing this as a community to help connect the dots. And we're using our reading mentor text to help bring it all together. So again, I'm hoping now you're seeing how one power-packed text can help us not only across the literacy block and integrate different parts of the literacy block, but also integrate different teaching methods and sometimes even extend beyond that literacy block as well. For one last artifact from the learning experiences that happened with this book, this was essentially a 21st century jigsaw-esque type of activity. So the students didn't read the whole book, but they read in small groups different sections of this book. So students sorted themselves into small inquiry teams and read one part of the text that they were interested in. The groups then spent, after they got a little bit of foundational information from the wisdom of trees, one more class period gathering some more information about the topic that they began to learn about in our mentor text. The groups then created a very short, not so fancy video where they could show off what they learned. And it was a little combination of like, what do you know and what did you find out? And of course, some fun facts were added in there too. And essentially you see, we created a not so fancy class interactive bulletin board. So they had their wonder on the their sticky note. And if you flipped up the sticky note, there was a QR code underneath it. And if you scan the QR code, it took you to the small group video that the students created. Again, this was done in 3 class periods. So this was not a big project. The videos were not super fancy. They were not wonderfully crafted. There was not a formal script. It was just a really great way for the kids to work collaboratively, do a little bit of research in the mentor text, do a little bit more research, and then share what they learned with the class community. But they were so excited again that they wanted to extend their learning beyond the class community. So essentially, again, not so fancy, we created a single slide. And we actually had a few different slides, but we had 2 slides. And this is one of the 2 slides. You could see again here too. But if you double click on these, anyone, it will take you to the video. And it was shared with other teachers in our building. So it was an invitation. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But if they wanted to share any with their classes, they could do so. We also shared it with the caregivers and the family members of the students that were in that classroom as well. So again, we can see that one text is really helping us to connect the dots between the different parts of literacy and go the distance with our teaching in ways that feel student-centric and exciting and joyful as well. So one more text set, and we're going to really focus in on Out of Wonder right now. And we're going to think about how we can use this one text with some older students too. So when I'm thinking about bringing in this really fabulous text Out of Wonder, which I love, 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 for an inquiry experience, what we did was we set up poetry stations. So in your classrooms, you might not set up all these stations. Very often teachers might set up 3. This is an example of a verse station. So the guiding inquiry as students moved from station to station was, what do poets do? And each station had its own theme. At this verse station, we set out different texts that were written in verse, and we had the students just explore. What are the poets doing here? And as they did that, we even had, you can see a scaffold here of some of the words that go with the study that we're currently doing to help kids while they were engaging conversationally at this station, to help them use and infuse content area vocabulary while they were chatting with one another. So this verse station was another station. And again, you can have all different stations out. Here are a few different examples of the type of stations you might choose to include in your classroom. We also used this poem for an entire cycle of shared reading. So we came back to this one fabulous poem in the book, For Our Children's Children, which celebrated another poem by Chief Dan George. And in the first session, we really focused on comprehension. We focused in on structure, and we thought about how the poem looks, how the poem was formatted and set up. And we thought about why the author, why the poet might have made those decisions about how they set up and formatted the poem. The second day we came back together, we revisited the poem, and we really thought about using the words of the poem and the amazing, gorgeous illustration and synthesizing what we saw in the words and in the illustrations together to grow bigger ideas. On the third session of shared reading, we came back together and we did some word work, and we thought about specific word choice that the poet chose to use. And then on the fourth day, we brought in another text, another poem, and we did a little poem to poem cross-text thinking and cross-text comparison. So shared reading is not only for the primary grades. This is great to use across all grades for community-based experiences where we can really integrate different aspects of literacy. Because students have their eyes on the poem, we can really, of course, focus on reading or writing things, but we could also focus on sounds, letters, patterns, roots, word parts, grammar concepts. We have so many different opportunities to efficiently integrate the different corners of literacy. And again, we can revisit any of the poems in that text set to help us think about and get inspiration for what we might want to try in our writing. So we might have a lesson on rereading a poem, asking ourselves, why do I like this? What's my favorite part? And how and when can I use this in my own writing, whether or not it's a poem, right? So we can really have students find inspiration in the topics, the structure and format, language choices, convention choices, so many different things that we might explore within any of the poems in this fabulous power-packed tool that we could use in our instruction. So I love this amazing inclusion. Again, I'm going to encourage you to pause and ponder for yourself one last time before we get ready to wrap up this session. And think about how you might use this poem with the students that are currently in your care. How might you use this as a reader? What inspiration might you find as a writer? Do you see any opportunities to study anything from word study or grammar right here on this page? Can you think about any ways to move beyond the literacy block? And when you're ready, please unpause and continue forward as we finish up this session. So we've talked about a whole lot in our session today. In this last minute or two, just want to take a moment to think about what I do when I'm trying to integrate literacy, choose texts, and create these lessons. So let me go back here. Just like I had 3 things that I consider when I'm choosing mentor text, I have 3 main things that I often consider when I'm creating lessons with those chosen power-packed tools. First, I again consider students. Then I consider the tools. Third, I consider the methods. So first, who? Again, I want to remain student-centric from beginning to end. I chose those texts with students in mind. I want to plan the learning experiences with students in mind as well. So first, think about the who, the students that are currently in the room, what their strengths are, what their interests are, what their passions are, and what their instructional next steps might be. Then consider the what and the where, and those are your mentor texts, right? So first the who, then the what and the where, and then finally the how. So once we have a grasp on who the kids are in the room, and we have a grasp on what tools we're going to use to support learning, then we want to think about the methods and the learning structures we're going to use to carry out those personalized and relevant instructional opportunities. This is how we enact our deep commitment towards asset-based instruction, and we are unwaveringly responsive to the students that are currently in the room by following processes that start with the who, then we get to the what and the how, following from there. So as we finish today, there's a couple of reminders and tips that are up here for you. I sincerely hope that the discussion and the examples prove that one power-packed text can really and truly be a springboard for lots and lots of classroom learning. And by fostering connections, students are better prepared to practice, transfer, and apply what they've learned from every corner of the literacy block. Keep these things in mind, have fun tinkering, and I'm going to encourage you as you finish today and right before you shut off the session to pause, ponder, and maybe jot just a little bit more. What are you taking away? What are you reimagining, wondering what might you share and what might you try? Remember that by using a smaller set of texts really intentionally and really strategically, it's a more sustainable way for us as educators to be able to move forward. Everything we talked about today is malleable. Customize the text, customize the methods, customize the strategies and the experiences so they make sense for you and the learners that are in your care. Lean into the playfulness and excitement that's found from tinkering with different ideas and seeing how students shift and shape even what you initially imagined. Have fun, enjoy the thrill of all these new learning opportunities that are ahead. And if you'd ever like to talk or stay connected, or if you have a question, please feel free to reach out. My email is here, social media is here, and I would love to get or stay connected and perhaps discuss any of these ideas. Thanks for all you do. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.